Nurses of Reddit, what is your funniest emergency room story? I used to work in the ER sometimes, and when we would pull stuff out of people's, it would get washed and sterilized and put in this box under the triage desk. When a new person started, we would run a pool on who could get the newbie to use something out of the box first. I won it once by taking the staples out of his stapler and then casually mentioning that, hey, there is a stapler in the box under the triage desk. I won $150 that day. Sue, someone crammed a stapler up their butt. I'm not sure how to feel about that. People cram everything up their butts. Not my story, but heard it from my cousin. She was training for her nurse diploma at the time at a local hospital. So there is this old guy coming in the ER with a big wound on his leg and he had to go for surgery. My cousin tried to prepare him for the surgery and asked him to remove his boots and clothes, so he can change into proper clothing. The old guy started yelling and cursing because he didn't want to get to his boots off. Several doctors came by to calm him and he started to fight them too. After some time, when he calmed down, they injected him some anesthetic in order to remove his boots without him over. It turns out he was ashamed to take them off because he had his nails painted red. Happened to my stepdad. He went for a routine drive visit, but his face kinda dropped when they asked him to take his shoes off. Turns out my sister had painted his nails sparkly gold 2 nights beforehand, and he knew he had the appointment like 3 months in advance. Doctor told him his nails looked very nice. I had a manic guy on a psych hold who eloped, ran like a gazelle out to triage barefoot in only his underwear. Once there, he stopped and weighed himself. Then, faced with his choice of 2 convenient doors out to the lobby, he instead climbed up onto the counter and through the little triage window, ran outside and stole a police car. Florida man. Not sure if it counts because it's not in the ER, but it still makes me laugh. Student nurse here. I work in home care. I once got a call from a client who was freaking out because a friend brought her home and now her friend said she didn't feel well, to the point she wasn't responding anymore. So here I go, rushing over, thinking about the questions I need to ask, things I need to observe, possible outcomes, etc. I arrive at the client's house. My client comes running to me, come fast, come fast. There she is. She runs to the couch and starts rubbing a pillow. Turns out she was hallucinating. But did you help? I work inpatient, but here are some stories. The patient had a routine. She told me that a previous nurse had told her to wipe front to back and how ridiculous that was, as she had wiped back to front her whole life and was fine. I asked her if she had ever had a routine before. She said, oh yeah, all the time. Had a patient who was coming down off of meth. He insisted that he had been kidnapped because a hold had been placed. He called 911 and said he had been kidnapped. The police arrived to make sure everything was alright. When the patient saw the police, his response was not, I have been kidnapped, please help, but to try and attack the police. We managed to disengage him without anyone getting hurt. As soon as they left, he demanded to use the phone to report his kidnapping. Once worked with a girl who seemed to have a near constant UT. She hated that she'd finish the treatment fit, finally get back to having with her boyfriend, then a couple weeks later have a routine again. I told her it was a small thing, but did she pee after? She says, oh no, hadn't thought of that. Then one day it came up in conversation that the alcoholic boyfriend she had unprotected with had a couple of really nice lady friends that he usually hung out with before she got off work. Girl, think we might have solved your mystery. All that time a nice fella taking a colonoscopy prep overdid it, and got to vomiting, just when the diarrhea kicked in. Eventually, exhausted and empty, but feeling better, he thought he'd try to get approved to go ahead with the colonoscopy instead of wasting the prep. GI said okay. If he went to the ED and got checked out for dehydration, infection, he hopped into the shower, cleaned off in a hurry and came to see me, having failed to notice that he used his teenage daughter's fancy silly glitter body wash. This big, macho, muscular, conservative-looking 50-year-old man, glittering like Edward from Twilight, Once he heard the workup was okay and he was clear for the scope, we all had a great laugh. My ex was a nurse and she once attended an emergency surgery of a guy who had been stabbed with the spork, the spoon terminus, mind you, and the instrument was still stuck in his chest when he arrived at the hospital. For some reason, on the fork side of the spork there was a little piece of wiener wurst attached. The surgeon's hand trembled from laughter during the whole operation. When asked during recovery about what happened, the guy said he'd slipped while eating dinner and fell on the spork, but the authorities suspect there was something more sinister going on. And spoon terminus, I didn't know this was a word that I needed in my life until now. My mom has been a nurse for my entire life, and I remember when she did her stint in the OR at our local hospital. She told me some guy came in complaining of pain in his but would not specify to the female nurses what happened. Being that the OR was a zoo, they implored the man to be honest just because they didn't have many men working on the floor, and since he was not in crisis he may have to sit for a while. Finally the man broke down and told him he was home watching some adult films when he got curious about a certain thing he saw a male performer do, but unlike the professionals, this guy couldn't get it out and it was currently stuck in limbo. My mom never specified what was shoved up his, but she said he got lucky they were able to get out completely. How could she tell you that whole story but not tell you what was up his? That's like Dave Chappelle doing an hour-long joke into dropping the mic and piecing out before the punchline. WTF, man. Not a nurse, but I'm pretty sure a nurse and some paramedics told this story. I walked in, WA tampon lodged in my nose. She ripped it out and laughed at me, and the paramedics were laughing in the background. Quick tip: tampons expand so much I had a nosebleed, and that had to be 10x worse than just waiting it out. How deep did you put it in for it to get stuck? And how deep did you put it in for it to get stuck? This is not a problem. Once you get it past the nostril, it's plenty of room inside. The nostril is the bottleneck. Not a human nurse, but a vet nurse. A hysterical man came in carrying his dog, and we prepared for an emergency situation. Except he then tells us the following: that the dog went over the fence in his yard and into his neighbor's house, climbed on top of his desk and ate the code device for his bank. Now he would like to get it out and replace it before the neighbor took notice, faced with tears of joy. Sounds to me like the dog doesn't like the neighbor very much either. That couldn't have been appetizing. All that time someone had an allergic reaction, and for some reason brought in live mussel for us, which our thought he had reacted to, in a little jar full of water, like a goldfish or something. We kept our little mussel friend for most of a day in the charting space. He did not contribute meaningfully to the workup or treatment plan. We had a guy come into the ER for a rattlesnake bite. He also decided to bring in the rattlesnake that he killed after it bit him this year. And I guess to go along with the theme of this thread, I'll clarify the rattlesnake was not inserted into his or anyone else's. And he also decided to bring in the rattlesnake that he killed after it bit him this year. Metal. Not a nurse but an MA, and I once had a patient that was a Catholic priest that developed a skin rash. He was treating it with that spray Clorox cleanup solution, which of course only made it worse. When asked about the rash, he said he caught it from his wife and then pleaded with us not to report him to the head guy at his church since he's not supposed to be married. Obviously we can't report things like that due to privacy laws. Turns out his wife was a hooker that was also one of our patients. FYI, Clorox spray, when applied liberally and directly to your genitalia, will cause burns. What an idiot. I can almost feel the fire in this church today. There's a sinner in this church. I was in charge one day and was called to rescue my wreck, who had been pulled to sit with a psych PT. I go down and he's pale and shaking, and his patient is straining at his leathers and screaming. I told the patient to calm down a sec so I can talk to my tech just to be a smartass, and he actually did. I told my tech to chill and call me if he needs me. I then told the patient I was done talking and he could go back to making a ruckus if he wanted. The meds had kicked in though, and he just called me Fat Mary Poppins as I left. Not a nurse, but I bet she told everyone, because she was cracking up at my innocence. I had the need for a poison ivy shot and my dad told me they shoot your butt. I'm like 15. So nurse says, time for your shot, can you me, pants down, butt out, pull your waistband down. The funny part is I kicked my shoes off as well, like I was about to get all naked and comfortable for a 1-second shot. We all laughed real hard at that. She had the pants down before, but never the shoes kicked off. I have a friend who is a nurse and she said they once had to deal with someone who had inserted a magic 8-ball up their butt. Most horrifying was someone who inserted a light bulb but it shattered. How do you even get a magic 8-ball up to there in the first place? Try again later. Several times. Not an emergency but funny story. My twin sister is a nurse and when we were in college she had a patient during an opt-in clinical, who was said she was using grape jelly as lube because the other jelly had seeds. She thought food jelly and petroleum jelly were the same thing. I mean petroleum jelly USNT good for condoms either. There is no limit to what people will put on or up. Not my story, but here it goes. Couple arrive late night in the him with a bleeding sore, her with multiple head injuries and a burned back. After being treated they eventually tell the story to the puzzled nurses. He was frying eggs when she decided to surprise him with a BJ. During the action he dropped the eggs on her back. She bit him and he started banging her head with the pan to stop. Kind of reminds me of that guy showing his cat to his subscribers and the cat gets its claw stuck in his pant leg so it starts attacking him and he's desperately trying to get it off. Hi monsieur. Not me but my friend is a paramedic. They had regular, who'd always have heart attacks and this time was no different, except it was much more serious. He was clinically dead for a few minutes so she made the decision to wind down the CPR as he'd have severe brain damage at the very least. They were just about to stop when he suddenly took in a deep gasp and opened his eyes. He sat up straight and just started chatting to the monsieur. His first words in fact was, "This isn't Sainsbury's." They kept trying to get to him to lie down and remain calm, but he kept joking around instead and said he was used to it. They took him to the hospital but he refused to be stretchered in or to even use a wheelchair and just wanted a coffee. Lol. My friend was completely gobsmacked as him being brought back without any brain damage whatsoever, or even being as aware and calm as he was a complete miracle. My sister works as a nurse in delivery ward. One couple wanted to name their kid a pretty interesting combination. The dad liked Sirius, and the mom liked Unique. Their last name was fairly ordinary so they basically wanted to name their kid Sirius Unique Smith. One of the nurses advised they give the kid another, less creative middle name as an alternative they could use when they got older in case the kid didn't like those two names. So they decided to go with Lee and that was how my sister ended up helping deliver a baby named Sirius Lee Unique Smith.